So, sometime in 2010, the Association for Measurement and Evaluation of Communication, simply called AMEC, 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 now invited a number of experts from the public relations field, especially, and communicators to come together to try to solve the problem of measurement and evaluation in public relations. What did they decide to do? They decided to come up with a set of guidelines. Now, the key word is that it's guidelines. So they are guidelines to show practitioners the ropes and show them the path that ideally they should take when it comes to measurement and evaluation. So somebody might say these are tips and tricks that AMEC and these bodies like PRSA and so decided to come together to fashion for the public relations and communication industry in general. Now, it began in 2010 with the 2010 Barcelona Principles. 5 years later, we had the Barcelona 2.0, which was in 2015, which was an upgrade on the 2010 Barcelona Principles. Now, we also have the 2020 Barcelona Principles, that is 5 years after the 2015 Barcelona Principles as well. Now, why do we keep having these different versions of the Barcelona Principles? Now, this is because as communicators, we realize that communication and humans change, culture, technology, all those things come into the fray when we are discussing communication. So, as communication develops, as societies develop, we ought to also develop how we go about our communication, our measurement and evaluation in this instance. And that's the key reason why we keep improving these Barcelona principles to suit the times. So it says over here that the principles, let me get to you a highlighter, a pointer. It says the principles aim to enhance the credibility and effectiveness of PR measurement practices. So just telling you the objectives is to make sure measurement practices in the public relations field becomes better. Now there are seven principles. In 2010, the principles were seven. 2015, 2020, same number. Now let us look at these principles. Now what we are going to do is we're going to look at each principle as you see in this table. We're going to look at each principle. Hold on for me. What did I go to do? Okay. All right. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at each principle and how it has developed over the years. So this is how I want you to look at this table. When you look at principle one, when you look at principle one to our left, this is principle one in 2010, and then this is an upgraded version of principle one in 2015, and then the 2020, which is where we are today. And then we go ahead to look at principle two to our right, that's the middle, and then to principle three, and so on and so forth. So let us come to principle one. Now let me clear my drawings. Okay. Okay. So here goes. So with principle one, we said that in 2010, it was indicated that the importance of goal setting and measurement. So the first principle in 2010 was that goal setting and measurement was important or is important. Now, what happened? What brought about the change in 2015? Let us look. Now, one thing we would have to take note of is with these Barcelona principles, some of them do not change too much as the years go by. but pay attention to keywords that are introduced or taken out of the various principles as we discussed them. Now, principle one says that goal setting and measurement is important. When we go to 2015 of principle one, it says goal setting and measurement are fundamental to communication and public relations. So the key word over here is that they are fundamental. Now, the first one said it was important. Now, this one is 2010, 20, sorry, 2015 is using a heavier word, which is fundamental. We cannot do without it. Is the basics to communication and public relations. Now, when we look at 2020, it says setting measurable goals is an absolute prerequisite to communication planning, measurement, and evaluation. So, again, they are letting us know that goal setting is an absolute prerequisite. We have moved from it being fundamental to it being an absolute prerequisite. And then it also includes that it is an absolute prerequisite to communication planning, measurement, and evaluation. So you realize that at each of these stages, it is indicating to us that goal setting is important. All right. So we go to principle two. We began by saying that measuring the effect on outcomes is preferred to measuring output. So we're saying when we talk about outcomes, let's talk about output. When we talk about outputs, these are the activities that we undertake. So we have put out three press releases. We have these press cuttings. We have been interviewed on radio these number of times. These are all outputs. The outcome is the effect of the output. So if somebody asks, and so what? The answer you would give to the output is what is the outcome. So, if, for instance, if you say, we have giving out three press releases, somebody will say, and so what? So now you are supposed to tell the person the outcome. What happened out of the three press releases? So and so what? Maybe your answer would be, and so we realize that these number of people are now abreast of the changes that are happening in our organization. So principle two says that measuring the effect on outcome is preferred to measuring outputs rather than counting the number of press releases you have sent out, because it does not actually tell you. It doesn't tell you what it is that you have been able to achieve. Indeed, impressions or engagement is not the same as knowledge or awareness, and it is in measuring outcomes that you will be able to get or understand, know the knowledge or understanding or awareness that your audience have. So in 2015, we came back, we said measuring communication outcomes is recommended versus only measuring outputs. Yeah. So now it is recommended. Earlier it says measuring is preferred. Now we're saying we are recommending that you measure your communications outcome versus only measuring outputs. So over here, we're trying to tell you we are not saying in 2010 that measuring output is wrong. We're saying do not measure only outputs. So measure outputs and also measure outcome. And then where we are today is with principle two is that measurement and evaluation should identify outputs, outcomes, and potential impact. So we have added another factor, which is the potential impact that we ought to look at. We look at principle three. Principle three says the effect on business results can and should be measured where possible. And this is 2010. The effect on business results can and should be measured where possible. Now, in 2015, the principle was saying that the effect on organizational performance can and should be measured where possible. So we have replaced the effect on business results We have changed it to effect on organizational performance. So rather than focusing on business results, we have used the word organizational performance, which is, in my opinion, significantly covers everything and anything that the organization does, whether even if it is not in relation to finance per se, anything that the organization is doing, even if it has to do with its turnover. So the effect on organizational performance can and should be measured where possible. And the effect of what? The effect of communication activities on organizational performance. In 2020, it says outcomes and impact should be identified for stakeholders, society, and the organization. So in 2020, we're saying that the outcomes and the impact of our activities should be identified and provided to stakeholders, society, and the organization for them to see and appreciate what it is that we are doing as public relations personnel. Now we go to principle 4. Now, principle 4 says that media measurement requires quantity and quality. So when we are measuring media, basically our outputs in the media, quantity and quality is important. So not just the numbers, but what it means. In 2015, it says measurement and evaluation require both qualitative and quantitative methods. In 2020, it says communication measurement and evaluation should include both qualitative and quantitative analysis. So you realize that there's not been much difference. The keywords that have been introduced, for instance, when you look at 2020, it says communication measurement and evaluation instead of just measurement and evaluation in 2015. So they are specifically showing us that we're talking about communication measurement and evaluation. So they're being specific, and again, they reiterate the importance of the inclusion of both qualitative and qualitative and quantitative analysis, in communication measurement. In 2010, for Principle 5, it says that AVs are not the value of public relations. Now, Principle 5 is arguably the most popular principle in the Barcelona Principles because it has been debated upon for quite some time. Now, what is Principle 5 talking about? It talks about advertising value equivalency or equivalent, which is AVs, and it is saying that they are not the value of public relations. Advertising value equivalency is basically, let me explain how it is seen in action. So, an advertiser pays $100 or $1,000 to get front page in a newspaper. Now, the public relations personnel, through his or her activities, gets free slots on the front page of a newspaper. Now, what this means is public relations personnel has, through his or her activities, given the organization free coverage, which the advertiser paid $1,000 for. So when they're doing advertising value equivalency, all they're doing is they're saying if you had paid for it in advertising, you would have spent $1,000. But because it is us, public relations professionals, you're getting it for free. So you see our value, we're we're trying to equate it with advertising and saying we have done this, then it means that we have saved the organization this amount or that amount, and that is our value. Now, in 2010, it said AVEs are not the value of public relations. Now, AVEs are not the value of public relations because of a number of reasons, and I do not know if there would be a separate video on AVEs. However, let me touch on one or two. AVEs are not the value of public relations because there are other things that public relations does that AVs are not able to. We can also use AVEs to prove its value. For instance, if you as a public relations personnel, you have a client who indicates that I want to help you to help keep me out of the media, because sometimes some clients may want to for some time lay low, and they employ a public relations personnel to help them keep them out of the media. Now, it is impossible to measure the value of such an activity using advertising value equivalency, because the activities are not going to be in the media even in the first place. So, yeah, now moving on to 2015, AVEs are not the value of communication. Now you realize that in 2010 it says value of public relations, but in 2015 it says not the value of communication. That is primarily because in 2010, when the principles were put together the first time, it was primarily focused on the public relations profession. That was not until 2015 when it was expanded to all communication based activities. So basically, we're talking about advertising, public relations, whatever it is, but all communication activities. We decided that AVEs are not the value of communication. And then it has basically remained the same through from 2015 to 2020. The sixth principle says social media can and should be measured. Social media can and should be measured. That was in 2010. In 2015, it says social media can and should be measured consistently with other media channels. So in 2010, the principle was identifying the growth of social media and the need for communicators to include that in their measurement activities. So do not shun social media and focus only on traditional media, but expand it to include social media. And then in 2015, it says social media can and should be measured consistently with other media channels. So in 2015, they're reminding us that 2010 does not really mean that other media channels should not be measured. So just for clarity purposes, in 2015,